Now we're going to have a look at SDG 8, decent work and economic growth. The underlying principle in this Sustainable Development Goal is to promote sustained, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth, full and productive employment, and decent work for all. This is an incredibly important SDG. So we'll have a look at some of the key statistics here. The economic recovery, as you probably are all aware, is being hampered by a number of issues. COVID, inflation, supply chain disruptions, policy uncertainties, labour market challenges, other climate-related issues that we're all very familiar with. The global economic recovery is further set back by the Ukraine crisis. And you can see there that the outlook for 22 and 23 are in negative terms. It looks likely that global unemployment is going to remain above the pre-pandemic levels, at least until 2023. Shockingly, 1 in 10 children are engaged in child labour worldwide. That's 160 million children estimated to be in 2020. And while worker productivity has rebounded, that has not happened in least developed countries. So there's some very significant challenges here. There are 12 targets in SDG 8. So let's have a look at them. Target 8.1. Sustained per capita economic growth in accordance with national circumstances, and in particular at least 7% of gross domestic product or GDP per annum in the least developed countries. So I'm sure some of you are familiar with what GDP is. GDP measures the monetary values of goods and services produced within a country's boundaries in a given time period. That's usually a quarter or a year. Changes in output over time as measured by the GDP are the most comprehensive gauge, or generally accepted as the most comprehensive gauge of an economy's health. So to monitor this, we're looking at the annual growth rate of real GDP per capita for each of the countries. And you can see there that there's a higher target for the least developed countries. Target 8.2. Achieve higher levels of economic productivity through diversification, technological upgrading and innovation, including through a focus on high value-added and labour-intensive sectors. So Goal 8 is based on the fact that sustained and inclusive economic growth can drive progress, create decent jobs for all, and improve living standards. To monitor this, we look at the annual growth rate of real GDP per employed person. Again, we will be looking in detail at all of these targets and indicators in the block that deals specifically with SDG 8. Target 8.3. Promote development-oriented policies that support productive activities, decent job creation, entrepreneurship, creativity, and innovation, and encourage the formalization and growth of micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, including through access to financial services. Policy and access to financial services allows individuals and companies to take advantage of opportunities, to innovate, to invest in education, save for retirement, and insure against risks. Hence, creating jobs and improving the country's economic outlook. The indicator for this goal is the proportion of informal employment in total employment by sector and sex. I suppose this is a way of trying to measure the amount of casual and informal employment with the idea of reducing that and having the majority of employment in participating countries being formalized employment. Target 8.4. Improve progressively through 2030 global resource efficiency in consumption and production, and endeavour to decouple economic growth from environmental degradation, as we spoke about before, in accordance with the 10-year framework of programs on sustainable consumption and production, with developed countries taking the lead. If you think back to Unit 1, where we looked at the impact of our economically driven world, the linear economy and global overshoot day, we can see the need to increase GDP, but of course, we cannot do this with an environmental cost. So that's something we have to be very careful about. Indicators are the material footprint per capita, and material footprint per GDP. Domestic material consumption per capita, and domestic material consumption per GDP. So we have to be very careful about the linkage that we have between economic growth and environmental damage. And as as the target points out, decoupling economic growth from environmental damage is absolutely essential going forward. Target 8.5. By 2030, achieve full and productive employment and decent work for all women and men, including for young people and persons with disabilities, and equal pay for work of equal value. What an important and fundamental goal that is. Are persons with disabilities well represented in the Irish workforce? The indicator for this target are the average hourly earnings of employees by sex, age, occupation, and persons with disabilities. Unemployment rate by sex, age, and persons with disabilities. A very important social target here. Target 8.6. By 2020, substantially reduce the population of youth not in employment, education, or training. The proportion of youth measured in this case is 15 to 24 years. Reports find that the pandemic has exacerbated the numerous labour market challenges facing those aged between 15 and 24, who have experienced a much higher percentage loss in employment than adults since early 2020. The global number of unemployed youths is estimated to reach 73 million in 2022. The indicator for this target is the proportion of youth aged 15 to 24 not in education, employment, or training, or NEET as it's known. Target 8.7. Take immediate and effective measures to eradicate forced labour and modern slavery and human trafficking, and secure the prohibition and elimination of the worst forms of child labour, including recruitment and use of child soldiers, and by 2025 end child labour in all its forms. Again, I think that's a target we can all fully support. Some of the figures in this particular target are quite shocking. 49.6 million people were living in modern slavery in 2021. nearly 50 million people. 27.6 were in forced labour and 22 million in forced marriages. 6.3 million were in forced commercial sexual exploitation. These are shocking statistics, and we all need to work together to ensure that this goal is achieved. And how is that going to be measured or monitored? The indicator for this is the proportion and number of children between 5 and 17 engaged in child labour by sex and by age. Target 8.8. Protect labour rights and promote safe and secure working environments for all workers, including migrant workers, in particular women migrants and those in precarious employment. Worldwide, there are around 340 million occupational accidents and 160 million victims of work-related illnesses annually. A shocking statistic here is that it is estimated that occupational accidents or diseases result in approximately 6,000 deaths a day. How are we going to monitor this, or what indicators are we going to look at? The first one is fatal and non-fatal occupational injuries per 100,000 workers by sex and migrant status. And the second one is the level of national compliance with labour rights. Target 8.9. By 2030, devise and implement policies to promote sustainable tourism that create jobs and promote local culture and products. I think we can all appreciate how relevant that is to the particular context in Ireland. And we did explore sustainable tourism previously, and this emphasises utilising the positive aspects of tourism in job creation. The indicator for this target is tourism direct GDP as a proportion of total GDP and its growth rate. Target 8.10. Strengthen the capacity of domestic financial institutions to encourage and expand access to banking, insurance, and financial services for all. The indicator for this, the number of commercial bank branches per 100,000 adults and the number of automated teller machines per 100,000 adults. The proportion of adults, i.e. 15 years or older, with an account at a bank or other financial institution or with a mobile money service provider. Target 8A. Increased aid for trade transport for developing countries, particularly least developed countries, including through the Enhanced Integrated Framework for Trade-Related Technical Assistance to Least Developed Countries. Aid for trade helps developing countries, particularly least developed countries, with trade. Many of them face a range of supply side and trade related infrastructure obstacles which constrain their ability to engage in international trade. The indicator for this target is aid for trade commitments and disbursements. Target 8B. By 2020, develop and operationalize a global strategy for youth employment and implement the Global Jobs Pact of the International Labour Organization. The Global Jobs Pact calls on its member states to put decent work opportunities at the core of the economic crisis responses and propose job centred policies for countries to adapt. The indicator for this is the existence of a developed and operationalised national strategy for youth employment as a distinct strategy or as part of a national employment strategy, obviously on a country by country basis. So there we have it, 12 targets, all of them essential. So we look at things like GDP, youth employment, slavery, work related injuries and fatalities, modern day slavery, equality, opportunities, international approaches to creating decent job creation. All of these require international approaches for decent job creation.